I know that my Redeemer lives.
The majority of Americans feel lonely. A 2019 survey led by health insurer Cigna found out that 61% of Americans report feeling lonely. Knowing that loneliness affects so many people should cause us as Bible students to wonder, did Jesus ever face loneliness? And while there may be several instances where he felt alone, there is one example that stands out above the rest because Jesus said he felt alone. It occurred while Jesus hung on the cross. Matthew 27 says, "Now from the 6th hour, which is about noon, until the 9th hour, which is about 3 in the afternoon, there was darkness over all the land. And about the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Matthew 27, verse 45 through 46. What Jesus cried out is a direct quote from Psalm 22 and verse 1. I'd like to take a few minutes to think about Psalm 22. It's important for us to remember that the Psalms are poetry. A poem isn't usually meant to be read literally. It conveys the emotions and the feelings of the writer. When we read the Psalms, we need to think, what is the writer experiencing? What is he feeling? Psalm 22 is a prophecy about the suffering of Jesus on the cross and the joy of his victory. It begins with the words Jesus said while hanging on the cross. Psalm 22, verse 1, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from helping me and from the words of my groaning?" If you read Psalm 22, verse 1, all the way down through verse 20, you'll notice a few things. The writer of the psalm feels unheard and very alone. The writer is surrounded by those who want to hurt him. And the writer knows how God has helped others in the past, and he wants help from God as well. You get down to verse 20, and at the end of verse 20, the question that is in the text at this point for those of us reading it is, will God hear him and help or not? The answer is given at the end of verse 21, where the writer says, you have answered me. And from this phrase in verse 21, the writer begins to praise God. And he's praising God because even though he felt alone, the Lord heard him and answered him. Now, after having thought about Psalm 22, let's turn our thoughts back to Jesus on the cross. When Jesus quoted the first phrase of Psalm 22 on the cross, I think he was doing two things. First of all, he was expressing that he felt the emotions of Psalm 22. What Jesus was feeling on the cross, you could find what he was feeling in Psalm 22. But secondly, and I think maybe most importantly, he was calling people to think about the connection between himself and Psalm 22. Jesus wanted the people gathered around the cross and those who would read the wondrous story to know that though he appeared defeated on the cross, he would be victorious. After his resurrection, Jesus stated that all authority had been given to him on heaven and earth, Matthew 28, verse 18. He was not defeated by death. But at that moment, surrounded by the jeering mob, hanging on a cross, he felt all alone. However, he knew the Father heard him and would raise him to be victorious, as Hebrews 5, verse 7 says. So what about us? Some of you who are watching this or who are listening to this are among the 61% of Americans who feel lonely. In fact, if we just go off of statistics, perhaps not some of you, but perhaps the majority of you watching this or listening to this are among those people who feel alone. There's no denying the feeling of loneliness. You can try to ignore it, but it's there no matter what you do. But you can remind yourself that just because you feel alone doesn't mean that you truly are. Jesus helps lonely Christians every day. Jesus has promised never to leave you or forsake you, Matthew 28, verse 20. Whenever you feel alone, Remind yourself of reality. Remind yourself that God is with you. Remember that the Lord stands with you, even in your darkest hour. 2 Timothy 4, verse 17. I'm reminded of the song, Hold to God's Unchanging Hand, a line from that song which says, Trust in Him who will not leave you, whatsoever years may bring. If my earthly friends forsaken, still more closely to Him cling. I appreciate you watching and listening to yet another episode of Centered on Christ.
Centered on Christ is emailed as an article 5 days a week. Click the link in the description if you want to start receiving Centered on Christ to help with your daily Bible study.